Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It is gone 9:21 a.m. Central African Time. We're crossing over to London and we're going to be talking with Dr. Asim Qureishi. He is the research director at Cage International. Now, we understand that Cage International has released a new report tracking how two pro-Zionist organizations, namely UK Lawyers for Israel and the campaign against anti-Semitism, have instrumentalized regulatory authorities in Britain to attack and harass those who criticize Zionism and Israel's racist policies. Assalamu alaikum to you, Dr. Asim. Welcome to the program. Nice to have you on the show.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Okay, I've just introduced that report. We do know that the report has been entitled Britain's Apartheid Apologists, and it sets out how, through foreign state interference and political and media cover, the groups represent a threat to the very foundations of democratic debate in Britain. How exactly is this playing out? And what are the pro-Palestinian and pro-other entities for the undermined underdogs of the world? How are they actually responding to this report?
Jazakumullah khair for hosting this discussion. So right now, we have a situation in the UK where we have a great deal of activism around Palestine taking place, of course, as we have all over the world, particularly since the events of 7th of October 2023. So what we found at Cage International in the cases that we were receiving in particular, which went up by about 500% in terms of our caseload, were just the sheer volume of people who were being affected by their pro-Palestine activism. And that could be something as simple as wearing a lapel or a badge, indicating their support for Palestine in some way. We found that people were losing their jobs, students were being kicked out of university or school, that people were being affected in lots of different areas of life. And while, at Cage International, we have a duty to represent these individuals and ensure that we get a good outcome in their cases to push back against these often, well, nearly always spurious allegations of anti-Semitism. We also felt that it was important to understand who is bringing these cases, what organizations are making these complaints against these individuals and organizations. And so we started looking into UK Lawyers for Israel and the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, because both of them play a very, very prominent role, public role, in relation to advocating about the way they go about their business. So they will actually say that, oh, we intervened in such and such person's case, and we intervened in this person's case. And even from our casework, we saw the letters that were being sent in order to attack those who were expressing pro-Palestine support. And of course, this is an issue because what it does is it undermines the ability of people to really advocate on their behalves. And really what was going on is that they were using the claim of anti-Semitism as a cover for Israel itself. So what is legitimate critique of Israel was instead being presented as anti-Semitism. So that really kind of summarizes why it is that we felt it was important to bring this report together.
And despite despite people like us who are fiercely pro-Palestine, and we make statements, against the genocide, we are being labeled as anti-Semitic. How does one, and especially, advocacy groups like yourself, what sort of narratives should we be putting out in the greater public space for people to realize the difference of anti-Zionist what is anti-Zionism and what is anti-Semitic? And I think in all of this noise that's been going on since October 2003, I've come across very little anti-Semitism going out into all of these spaces. What I am seeing and picking up is pushback against anti-Zionism, and yet the Zionists seem to turn the narrative around, and they seem to have the full backing of, I think, the Western world, so to speak.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that conflation is being done purposely so. And we see this through a particular instrument that has gone international, which is called the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition. So the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. And when they put this definition together, what they did is to include a series of case studies within which they explicitly, kind of state how critique of Israel is a form of anti-Semitism. Now, of course, we would push back on that, and the narratives that are important for all of us to keep on reinforcing are that Israel is a settler colonial, racially segregated apartheid state, and that is a fundamental reality of Israel's legal position. Is a position that is well documented under international law. And so, what we have, and we make this very clear in the report, is international law on our side. If you read not just our introduction, but the foreword that was written by IJAN, the International Jewish Activist Network, what we make very, very clear is that you look at the International Court of Justice's advisory opinion from last year, it leaves no doubt that the state of Israel is an apartheid, racially segregated state, and that is illegal under international law. You cannot defend that. And so part of our claim within this report is that these two organizations, these lobby groups that are operating in the UK, they are charitable trusts. And so it's important for the charities regulator to be actually asking serious questions of them, that how can two charities operate within the UK while promoting apartheid as being a legitimate form of political reality for, in terms of governing the Palestinian territories.
So obviously, their main aim is to silence Palestinian activism. I should imagine not only in the UK, because if they get it right in the UK, then they have that much more muster to go all around the world with the silencing of Palestinian activism. How far down the line is Cage International with this work? Are you concerned that you're going to get a lot of pushback? Are you getting people and other European countries as well waking up to the fact that there is this genocide playing out? There will be people on the street that are pro-Palestine. There are people that are calling for a stop to this horror, the genocide and the ethnic cleansing, because any right-minded soul will realize that this is what is happening. And if Zionists are allowed to get away with the situation in Palestine, who is next, and what horrors will be perpetrated to other peoples around the world if this is not stemmed now?
That's exactly right. What we're looking at is the first live stream genocide that's taking place. And to go explicitly to your question, we already work very closely with partners across Europe, and that's extremely important because we're seeing the same tactics being used again and again. And in order to actually push back against this Zionist network of organizations, we actually have to collaborate more closely with one another, because what we're seeing really is the ways in which European governments are learning from one another in terms of how to repress this pro-Palestine support that is out there, whether it's through closing down demonstrations or closing down organizations or whatever it might be. I think we're still a little better in the UK than elsewhere across Europe, but things are getting increasingly bad here as well in terms of the ability to really speak about Palestine. We're seeing like almost endless cases of people losing their jobs, as I mentioned already, and to go back to the report, this really happens through regulatory authorities. That's how, the Zionists use this. So they'll go to the General Medical Council and say, hey, look, this doctor was wearing a Palestine badge, and we'll say like outlandish things like that's an expression of support for October the 7th, or an expression of support for the destruction of Jewish lives, which of course is an absolutely ludicrous suggestion. But of course, what they're trying to do is, by conflating, as we've said before, anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, is to link pro-Palestine support to the Holocaust, which of course it's a nonsense. If anything, the Holocaust is connected to what they're doing to Palestinian lives every single day.
Absolutely, and ethnic cleansing. The number of cases that have come across your organization, have you been able to successfully defend those, very especially in the case where people have been fired from their jobs simply because of them supporting the Palestinian cause? What sort of work is being done? What sort of interventions does Cage International put in place? Because all it needs is for a few people to be fired from their positions, and these could be breadwinners. And even if they're not, nobody wants to be fired. Be that as it may, what is it? What sort of support are you giving them? And what sort of messages, loud messages, do we have to put out there for people to wake up to this? To these backhanded tactics to silence the Palestinian activist voices?
Thank you. So our entire process is we have caseworkers who deal directly with our clients who come to us for support. What we try to do is empower them to really push back against the process that they're going through, and in order to actually use their case in order to help educate their institutions, whether it's a school, it's a university, it's in the workplace, maybe in a hospital, about what's actually going on, rather than simply just being a victim in that moment. Look, the whole process of being investigated or being suspended is extremely onerous. It's very difficult on the person. As you mentioned, they're possibly the breadwinner of the household, and so they have some serious investment in terms of trying to make sure that they're able to provide for their families. But at the same time, what we're saying to them is that, hey, actually, look, if you take a stronger approach and you really center the Palestinian struggle in your response and really help to educate exactly what it is, not only that you're saying, but what this cause is about, then what we find actually is that the exact opposite happens, where through the course of the case, we're able to set some important precedent for speaking about the Palestinian cause. Now, there was a case recently. It wasn't one of our cases, but it's a case that some of our legal colleagues were working on, of a solicitor who was being reprimanded by the Solicitors Regulation Authority for a series of posts that he had put online that were claimed to be anti-Semitic. Now, some of whatever the case about the posts might be, some of them might have been a bit problematic. What ultimately it came down to was, even though the case was a loss, the judgment was extremely interesting. And this is the case of Farooq Hussein, his solicitor. What the High Court Justice said is that effectively you cannot conflate anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism. And that's an extremely important precedent. And he said, even to the extent that you can call the Israeli state a Nazi state, you can refer to it as being fascistic, you can do all of these things. Nothing within our freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and impinges on that right to be able to do so, because there are good material around, kind of facts that would back making such a claim. And so I think that even in loss, sometimes if cases are constructed in a certain way, they can be, elements that are extracted from those cases in order to forward our cause. And I think that's the important thing, to make sure that at all times, those who are facing difficulty are centering the Palestinian cause themselves. Because what we don't want is people to express their solidarity for Palestine in ways that are completely normal, and then to start backtracking and start making public claims that are completely untrue and end up actually supporting the Zionist state.
When the genocide started in Gaza, I think the whole world, or much of the Western world, kind of almost took the stance of sitting back and waiting to see how it would unfold. I don't think anyone imagined the horrors that we'd be seeing on our screens. 300 odd years, 300 odd days later, the horrors continue and they're much worse than ever before. And I'm wondering, particularly in your case, being a British citizen, being based in London, are you seeing a shift regarding your government's position on the Palestinian situation? Are you seeing a shift around you with government and other organizations that are beginning to wake up to the fact that this is a Holocaust that is playing out in front of our eyes, and we are doing nothing about it? Nobody is, wanting to stop it. Everybody is just busy. All governments are looking after their own selfish interests. We know the Middle East is a typical example of that as well. But are you at Cage picking up any shifts in the right direction? Is there hope?
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily describe it as hope. I think we are seeing the shift that you're speaking about, and that's really important and really significant for us to think about. I think the shift that happened about a couple of weeks ago, where you had mainstream, many of our political leaders up to the very kind of highest levels of government, and particularly right wing media commentators, like all of a sudden, like on the same day, start to speak about the need to bring all of this to an end, to ensure that the Palestinians got aid, that they got supplies, so on and so forth, that Israel had gone too far. And at least it was my estimation that what this shift was effectively a desire by the West to try and save Zionism from itself. It can see that Zionism is in terminal crisis. Like the West can see that there is no way that in perpetuity can they support such a settler colonial apartheid regime. And so what they're trying to do right now, I believe, is to minimize the horrors to Netanyahu and his regime and say, it's not all Zionists, it's not all Israelis. What it is this particular brand of right-wing Zionism, or kind of right-wing politics, that is the cause for this entire genocide that's taking place. And I think that's really what's happening here. That the West is really trying to save Israel from itself, because they want it to carry on and they want it to continue. And the best way that they can do that is to try and say, hey, look, no, actually, we really want a two-state solution. We really want to ensure that Palestinians have political autonomy. And all of that is to distract away from what really needs to happen, which there needs to be one democratic state. We can't have like these Bantustans of the West Bank and Gaza. We can't have apartheid. We can't have racial segregation if we're going to be ethical about what the future of Palestine looks like.
Absolutely, and that's where we have to leave it. But that all, of course, underlying all of what we've covered this morning is really about Western interest having a hold in the Middle East, and the best way they can do it is have Israel's existence absolutely and ongoing. And that's what it's all about, is it not?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what it's about. They just want to make sure that it continues in perpetuity, and our job is to ensure that that Zionism cannot continue in this world, because it is an ideology rooted in fascism and racism.
Dr. Asim Qureishi from Cage, thank you indeed. We'll be watching this situation very, very closely, as we have been doing from the start of the genocide. May Allah accept all of your efforts. Assalamu alaikum to you. It is exactly 9:40 a.m. News and views on Salam Media, and standing by to talk to us is, of course, Freedom Flotilla Coalition member, and that, of course, is Yasmin Achar, I think that's how it's pronounced. They're going to talk about the Madeleine preparing to sail to Gaza with much, much, much needed provisions for the people of Gaza.